I told the both of you school is stupid. It's not how you learn things.
This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Stay tuned at the end and we'll tell you how to get 10% off with our link, squarespace.com/screenprism.
You're as dumb as they come.
We often look down on people who take things too literally, but some of Rick and Morty's most hilarious jokes are derived from being literal.
Well then get your shit together! Get it all together and put it in a backpack! All your shit! So it's together!
Taking a sci-fi trope and interpreting it literally, picking apart common knowledge, and taking a concept all the way to its logical conclusion.
Fighting continues as the Dog Army captures the eastern seaboard. It appears clear at this time that the era of human superiority has come to a bitter end.
Matching a scientist's thought process, the show takes conventional story cliches and everything we generally assume and unpacks it with a thorough, defiantly literal mind. The result, besides being funny, teaches us to break our habit of processing our lives through assumptions. It teaches us to think like Rick.
Oh, you agree, huh? You like that Red Green Grumbolt reference?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I made him up. You really are your father's children. Think for yourselves, don't be sheep.
Far from allowing viewers to watch in a placid, Jerry-like oblivion, the show's genius for being literal pushes us to look at the world as Rick does, questioning everything, avoiding assumptions, and trying to perceive the many-layered complexity life has to offer.
Life is effort and I'll stop when I die.
The show asks, for example, what if a telepathic cloud actually existed? How would this cloud be able to untangle the thoughts it hears and understand which thought relates to which human words?
I communicate through what you call Jessica's feet. No, telepathy.
Or would a Frankenstein monster share the personalities of all the people whose body parts it was made of? Then, if this were a monster made up of half Abraham Lincoln and half Hitler, how would it reconcile the conflicting values it has?
Because I definitely think that all men are created equal, but at the same time...
Okay.
To think like Rick, it's necessary to master something called first principles thinking.
First principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world. And what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there.
In our daily life, we almost never think this way. Instead, we mostly think by analogy. For example, if we see this, we make a snap decision because we've seen this before. It's round, it's red, it's shiny. It's an apple. But what if it's not an apple? Past experience lets us jump to instant conclusions, and we do this thousands of times a day, almost every time we have a thought about anything. Thinking by analogy saves our brains a lot of time and effort.
We reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
But it also stops us from discovering anything new. If we thought by analogy 100% of the time, we'd still be traveling like this.
Nobody wants a car because horses are great and we're used to them and they can eat grass and there's lots of grass all over the place, and there's no gasoline that people can buy, so people are never gonna get cars.
Right.
People did say that.
Rick tries to make his grandkids avoid the mistakes of thinking by analogy.
This seems kind of fancy.
Jerry, for all you know, this is the equivalent of an alien truck stop. You have no frame of reference.
And in many ways, the show does the same thing for us. By evaluating sci-fi possibilities without skipping over the awkward details, Rick and Morty mimics the comprehensive process of a scientific thought experiment.
Stay scientific, Jerry.
Most of the stories we watch are full of cliches and conventions that don't make any sense, but that we happily accept because we're so used to seeing them. But just like Rick, the show never misses an opportunity to point out ineptitude or logical errors in classic sci-fi stories and other movies it references.
It's just like that movie that you keep crowing about.
You talking about Inception?
That's right, Morty. This is gonna be a lot like that, except, it's gonna maybe make sense.
In Anatomy Park, we see how implausible it is that in many sci-fi movies, there's a character who willingly steps forward to sacrifice him or herself for the good of the team.
There's no autopilot. One of us will have to stay here and operate it manually.
When Rick and Morty meet Scary Terry,
Welcome to your nightmare, bitch!
a B-list Freddy Krueger, they point out a pretty glaring issue with horror movies in general by taking the sentence at its word.
You know what? He keeps saying we can run, but we can't hide. I say we try hiding.
They also point out the issues a number of films have with vampire naming conventions.
Feratu's presence was discovered by the humans. He has been destroyed.
No bother. The mortal shall soon. I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
In M. Night Shyamalan's, they point out a problem with director M. Night Shyamalan's trademark twists. They aren't always that cool, especially if we know they're coming, like we do when we go to see a Shyamalan film.
Oh, this is going to be such a mind.
Rick finds out that he's in a simulation, then it turns out he was in a simulation of a simulation, and another simulation after that.
How dumb are you? You're inside a simulation of a simulation inside another giant simulation.
And he gets more and more annoyed with each realization, mimicking the audience's mood when they're watching a bad mind bender. We just get fed up with the constant twists and turns, and we're ready to know what's real. All of these jokes train the audience to become more aware of the way that many stories rely on easy, unexamined conventions. Rick and Morty is trying to avoid this kind of copping out by maintaining logical integrity in its plots and in the way that its characters resolve their dilemmas. Rick and Morty is also picking itself apart, like a sentient TV show asking, "What am I?" It begins by mixing up the formulas we expect. We're used to seeing any TV show episode or movie begin with exposition, which sets up the upcoming plot lines. Rick and Morty sometimes gets rid of this exposition altogether. For example, here's how the episode Me Seeks and Destroy begins.
Good work, Morty.
This plot doesn't play any part in the actual episode or anywhere else in the show. Meanwhile, the title sequence features a lot of shots we never see on the show. This creates a strange feeling of, did I miss an episode? And it suggests that Rick and Morty's adventures go on whether we're watching or not. We sense that Rick and Morty's multiverse has autonomy, existing outside of what we observe. And this disrupts the traditional hierarchy of viewer and show. The show also has a running self-commentary, like in the many times Rick and others break the fourth wall.
All right, see you next week, everybody.
When Rick and Morty are watching the interdimensional cable, Rick says about a show,
Yeah, it's got an almost improvisational tone.
We immediately recognize this statement to be a comment on Rick and Morty, because Justin Roiland often does break character or sound like he's improvising.
And they're gonna. It's called Two Brothers. Two Brothers. It's just called Two Brothers.
In Me Seeks and Destroy, Morty seems aware that his trips with Rick are stories in the form of self-contained adventures of the week.
You keep heckling my adventure, Rick.
He even references Joseph Campbell's monomyth.
You know what? I accept your call to adventure.
We later get a callback to Morty's awareness of the serialized nature of his and Rick's adventures.
I, Morty Smith, invoke my right to choose 1 in every 10 Rick and Morty adventures. Read them in
Damn it.
By giving the characters lines that sound like writer's room banter, the show gives the characters power over their own story. Rick and Morty know about their own character arcs.
That's my series arc, Morty. If it takes 9 seasons.
And that makes us think that if we started looking at the stories of our own lives in a certain way, maybe we could pay attention to and influence our character arcs. So the show's self-awareness challenges us to become a little more self-aware too.
I want you kids to look around you today and think about your future. Now is the time in your life when anything is possible.
The science fiction genre has long used futures or alternate realities to comment on deep, close-to-home issues in our own society. Think slavery and freedom, or what it means to be human. Rick and Morty continues this tradition of deep-thinking sci-fi, but with a twist. They take the pathos down a notch and dial up some of the more ridiculous aspects of our culture. The science fiction worlds Rick and Morty visit regularly overflow into the regular one Morty's family inhabits. In other stories, this kind of intrusion typically elicits terror and shock. The Muggles' world is always shaken when they witness magic. But Rick's family reacts to alien intrusions with mild irritation or indifference. This goes to illustrate just how capable humans are of getting used to the weirdest things. We view something as normal simply because it's been around long enough.
Traditionally, science fairs are a father-son thing.
Well, scientifically, traditions are an idiot thing.
This unfortunate trait is illustrated by Rick's family's selective blindness. Rick and Morty also hilariously infuses the sci-fi worlds with elements of our world, like our obsession with networking.
Nice to meet you, Morty. Listen, if you ever need anybody murdered, please give me a call.
Therapy.
Does Grandpa turn himself into a pickle a lot?
Marketing.
Advertising. Wow. So people need help figuring out what to buy, and then you help them?
And using people for profit.
No. They work for each other in exchange for money, which they then...
Well, that just sounds like slavery with extra steps.
All of these jokes go to show that sometimes the social phenomena our world produces are actually stranger than an alien assassin named Crumbopulous Michael. Our brains are wired to make cognitive shortcuts wherever possible. Every stereotype, cognitive bias, or rule of thumb we possess is something our brains use to come to conclusions faster and save processing power for other things. Rick and Morty teaches us to undo some of this conditioning, to challenge our complacent approach by dismantling, step by step, the prepackaged concepts we heavily lean on without realizing. It asks us to forget what we think we know, and meanwhile to allow ourselves to get a little wackier in our thinking.
Yeah, I'd like to order one large person with extra people, please.
So that we might arrive at something more original, profound, and true. Ultimately, the show's plays on genre tropes and its literalism do more than just add humor and postmodernist flair. They make us smarter by showing us how to think like Rick.
Turn myself into a pickle, Morty! Boom! Big reveal!
Thank you to Squarespace for supporting this video. If you're considering starting a website, you need a domain, or you want to build an online store, sign up through our link, squarespace.com/screenprism, and you'll get 10% off. You can actually start a free trial without even entering your card details, so there's really no downside. We really love what Squarespace has to offer. They have some genuinely good-looking, sleek designs for their websites. And it's exceptionally easy to use their all-in-one platform. So start your free trial today at squarespace.com and go to squarespace.com/screenprism to get 10% off your first purchase.